welcome to this Sunday morning. We are in the South region of the Denver Church of Christ. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Montgomery. Me and my wife, we have the privilege of serving the youth and family ministry here in the South region. Yeah. But I actually was not supposed to preach today. Rob Ferry was, but Rob is right now in Pennsylvania visiting his mom. And if you can keep his mom, Rob, and the whole Ferry family in your prayers right now, that would be great. His mom's condition is, at this point, it seems imminent. And so she's not, her health is really declining, and so that's why he's there with her. And so if you could just keep the Ferry family in your prayer, that would be great. But today, I'm going to preach, and I'm going to preach in this whole series that we've been doing. This whole year, we are focusing on the theme of wisdom. We're just talking about wisdom all year, and I love this theme. I think there's a lot we can learn from the wisdom of the God that we serve. And to start out this month, we're talking about the fear of God. And in Proverbs, it literally says the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom and knowledge. And that's what we wanted to start with for this month, to start out this series, just talking about wisdom. And today, we are going to talk about victory in the fear of God. Last week, Rob talked just generally about what the fear of God even is, and it's this really healthy dynamic that we can have in our relationships with God, this healthy fear of Him where we understand where we are in comparison to who He is. There's an innate humility and respect that comes with a true fear of God. And today, I want to talk about how this fear of God leads to victory in our lives. Because it truly does. But victory is awesome. We love feelings of victory, feeling like we won something, feeling like we are victorious. We just conquered something. This feeling that we all have probably felt before, this feeling of victory. It has a way of keeping us going even in the midst of tough and trying times, this feeling of victory. You know, we're in Denver. And so a lot of you in this room are probably Broncos fans. So you kind of know what I'm talking about with this feeling of victory, kind of. This past year of football, it was hard for me too. It wasn't just y'all. It was hard for me too. I'm a Patriots fan. This was a tough year. This is a tough year for the Patriots. It was a tough year for the Broncos. We can relate on this level. But you guys can all remember when Peyton Manning, not too long ago, led you all to a Super Bowl championship. You were victorious. You all felt that feeling of victory when the Broncos won that Super Bowl in whatever year that was. It's getting long ago. I don't know. In the middle. But here's the thing about that Super Bowl victory. I know that none of you guys were on the field playing when that team won the Super Bowl. I'm pretty sure none of you were even at that game. Maybe one or two of you were actually at the game when they won the Super Bowl. But when they won, you guys were probably at a Super Bowl party hanging out, eating some appetizers, like, yes, we just won the Super Bowl. You felt as victorious as Peyton Manning did on that day. That's what this feeling of victory does to us. We can't help but celebrate when we are victorious, even if we're not even the ones doing the thing that gets the victory. I remember when I was in second grade, I was 7 years old, I played for my local park district basketball league. And that second grade year, my team, we made it to the championship. We made it to the championship, and I remember little parts of that day. I was 7 years old. But I remember it was a long, hard game. We were neck and neck with the other team during this championship game. But we won the championship. It got down to like the end of the game, and we made some key free throws, and the other team came back. They didn't hit the shot that they needed to force overtime or something. It was something like that. I don't know. The only thing that matters is that we won that championship game. And I was going crazy. Everyone was going crazy on my team, like, yes, we're champions. Our parents were like coming onto the court, like, oh, yeah. Like this is a second grade Park District championship. But I was eating it up. I was like, yes, we're champions. We just won. I scored 2 points in that game. I was a little bit of a non-factor. But it did not matter because we were victorious. We had won the championship. But that's what victory does to people. We just have this crazy feeling that we can do anything because we are victorious. You know, we need to experience this sort of victory in our lives with God. In our lives with God, He will work miracles. He will change hearts. He will transform situations, alter different situations in our lives that we thought would be impossible to change. And we will be victorious in those situations. But the first step to this victory with God is fearing Him. True victory is always on the side of the one who fears God. And so today we're going to look to some scriptures to see how this happens, how this victory is won through the fear of God. And to do this, we're going to talk about the lives of Saul and David in 1 Samuel and see what victory happens in their lives as they strive to fear God. And so you guys can all turn to 1 Samuel. We'll only be in 1 Samuel today. But we're going to begin by talking about the life of Saul. And I want to give you guys some background about Saul and his whole situation as king of Israel, as he was entering as Israel's first king, actually. And it starts with this Israelite people that God has big plans for. God freed this people from their slavery in Egypt. They had hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt, and God freed them from this, and He led them through the wilderness for 40 years to this promised land where He wanted to establish them as this nation of His people. This Israelite people, this is my people. He wanted them to be this nation of true image bearers of God and His character. He wanted them to uphold justice, to serve those around Him, to be an example to the nations around them, to serve God as their true king as a people. But the people aren't exactly living up to this plan that God has for them. But even still, God is still loyal to this people in spite of their shortcomings. And so throughout this whole process of God transforming this group of people, He raises up different leaders to lead them. He raises up these prophets such as Moses. Moses, this prophet, to lead the people as God guides Moses to lead them to this promised land. And after Moses, he had Joshua to lead them, and he was more of a military leader. There was a lot of battles going on with Joshua as he was leading this Israelite people. And then He raised up judges to lead the people, as there is kind of this cycle of people disobeying God and like bearing the consequences of their disobedience. And then, God, we need leaders, help us. And He helps them in this whole cycle of all these judges. And after all this, the Israelite people are like, you know what, God? We're done with these leaders that You keep giving us. Stop it with these prophets. Stop it with these judges. Give us a king. We need a king so that we can be like all the nations around us. That's what's going to make us secure. And at the time, God's prophet to His people, Samuel, he warns the people about the grave mistake of trying to instill a king as their leader. But God tells Samuel, you know what? Give them a king. A king is what they want. Give them a king. And so God gives them Saul. This is the first king of the Israelites, King Saul. And Saul is exactly what you would expect a king to look like. The Bible describes him as somebody super handsome, a head taller than everyone else in Israel. He's just this king-looking guy. He's got all the features of a king that people would think. And in this story that we're about to read, God, through Samuel, instructs Saul to go to this nation of the Amalekites and totally wipe out everything there. Everyone, all the cattle, all the sheep, everything they see, wipe it out. He wants it done. That was God's instruction for Saul. And so let's pick it up. We're going to start reading about this story and start seeing a little more of Saul's character throughout this story. So we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 15. I'm going to start reading in verse 7. It says this: Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. So he didn't totally destroy everything there. He didn't totally follow God's instruction for him. He brought back their king, their sheep, their cattle, the fat calves, the lambs. Like, why does he do this? Why is he bringing things back when God told him to wipe everything out from the Amalekites? And I think as we keep reading, we're going to see a little bit into Saul's heart about why he does this, why he needs to disobey God in this situation. And so let's keep reading. We're in verse 10. It says, "Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instruction." Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, "Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal." When Samuel reached him, Saul said, "The Lord bless you. I've carried out the Lord's instruction." But Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" Saul answered, "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest." "Enough," Samuel said to Saul. "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." "Tell me," Saul replied. Samuel said, "Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, 'Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out.' Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord?" "But I did obey the Lord," Saul said. "I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal." But Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." You know, this passage it's very interesting, the way that Samuel is talking to Saul. Because he's incredibly wise with what he's saying, the ways that he's bringing this up to Saul. Like, you have been so disobedient to God. But I think in verse 23, he really addresses some stuff that's in Saul's heart here. He addresses his rebellion, and he addresses his arrogance. I think Samuel sees what's going on in Saul's heart that Saul might be trying to keep from him. Because it's not just that Saul shows a lack of the fear of God in this story. He shows how much he fears men. His heart showed that he cared more about impressing the people of Israel than obeying God. Let's keep reading. Let's continue in verse 24. It says, "Then Saul said to Samuel, 'I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instruction. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin, and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord.' But Samuel said to him, 'I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel.' And as Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught a hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, 'The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being that he should change his mind.' Saul replied, 'I've sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God.' So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. He says, yes, I've sinned against the Lord, but please come honor me before these elders. Me sinning against God, that's okay. We could work that out later. That's secondary to what I want out of this situation. Saul was primarily concerned with his status and favor amongst the people. So he sought after their approval rather than the approval of the God that he was serving. And the thing is, he got what he wanted. Samuel went back with him. He worshiped God with him. He honored him before the elders. He got what he wanted in the situation. But it cost him the kingdom that God blessed him with. Saul feared men more than God, and his victory was empty. It meant nothing in the grand scheme of his life. Have you ever felt that feeling before? Going after something, going after just what you want in a given situation? Just, skip what God said. I understand that. That's secondary to what I want out of this situation. Have you ever felt that feeling of even getting that thing and it just feeling empty? Like, man, that was a waste of my time. Why am I going after this? Why is this such a pull for me to go after this rather than just what God is telling me to do? Have you ever felt that feeling? Man, there's something in the way of this moment really feeling as good as it should, but it doesn't. Because it's an empty victory when we choose not to fear God. Our blatant disobedience of God stains any hope of a true sense of victory. You know, for me, man, whenever Courtney and I, my wife and I, whenever we get in an argument, pray for me. Man, so many times I choose to be prideful and I only care about winning the argument. That's all I'm focused on. There's no fear of God that's guiding me through this when I choose pride. It's just, I got to win this argument. You ever felt that? I have. There's even been a few times where it's been clear to me, like, I just won this argument. There's nothing she can say. Ain't no further discussion needed. I just won this argument. But it's funny, in those moments when I win the argument even, it never really, I lost. It never really feels like winning. And I fall for that trap so often in my pride. Like, man, why can't I just be more humble? I get so prideful and so just focused on winning. And then I think, if I win, it's funny how I literally think in the middle of an argument, if I win this is all going to turn out right. Everything's going to be made right. She's going to understand she was wrong. She's going to apologize. Everything's going to be made right. But usually things just get more complicated and less figured out when I choose to be prideful in our arguments. And I end up hurting my wife in the process. Choosing to be prideful and only caring about winning arguments leads to empty victories for me. And it's because the fear of God in these arguments looks a lot more like humility and a lot less like pride. Sometimes I literally forget that I'm arguing with a daughter of the King of Kings. Think about that for a second. I forget. It all gets tossed to the wind when I'm thinking, just in my pride, that I am so blessed to be married to a person like Courtney. Like, beyond blessed. And this is a daughter of God that I'm choosing to be prideful against, and I'm trying to win against, and that's my only goal here. Like, something is wrong. I'm showing a lack of the fear of God. And I want to ask you today, church, where in your life are you just focusing on getting what you want and lacking a fear of God? How might you be blatantly disobeying God or disregarding his commands for your life just so you can feel like you've won something? What is the empty victory that you're wasting your time chasing right now? And I think once you think of that for yourself, I want you to ask yourself how God feels about that. And then I want you to think of what it looks like to actually fear God in that situation. What does a real fear of God look like in that situation? Because it's funny, when I choose to actually fear God in those arguments, then it seems like things kind of magically just work themselves out. When I choose to be humble, it's crazy how quickly this argument turns into us just being reconciled together. Just because I chose to fear God in that moment, because I chose to be humble. And I want to encourage you all that in all of the situations that you might be thinking about, true victory starts with a fear of God. Now, this is a good time to probably transition to talking about David, because David, he was the next king of Israel. And I think through this story, we'll see a real fear of God in this man's heart. And so we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 17. A little background. After this story of Saul's failure to fear God, God moves on. He tells his prophet Samuel to go and anoint this new king of Israel that God leads him to. And he leads him to David, son of Jesse. And you have to understand, David was a shepherd boy. Literally when Samuel goes there to see, like, who is God trying to tell me to anoint as king, this guy Jesse, first of all, he has 7 sons. 7 sons. Hey, there's a lot of wrestling going on in there. A lot of stuff. This guy's got 7 sons, and Samuel's like, okay, I'm looking at all these sons. Wow, there's a lot of sons. A lot to choose from this one guy. And he's looking at all these guys, some of the strong ones, some of the ones more handsome. And he's like, yeah, what about all these guys? And God's like, no. The guy you're looking for, he's not even in the house right now. He's the shepherd boy. And I think you'll see throughout this story exactly why God prefers David to Saul as the king of his people. Because as David is a shepherd boy tending to his flock, Saul is the one who's actually leading the army of Israel to these. They actually had a victory against the Amalekites. This is what Saul is doing as David is a shepherd boy. But God does not look at the outward appearance, church. And I think we'll see that throughout this story. And so Samuel goes and he anoints David to be the king of Israel. And so in the eyes of God, at this moment, David is king. It doesn't change much for David right now, especially with like his position amongst the people of Israel yet. But Samuel anoints David as king. And so after this, David goes and he brings food. The rest of his brothers now are fighting in this war against the Philistines, this battle that's going on. And David goes and he brings food. He's the food boy now. He brings food to his brothers as they're fighting the Philistines. And the Philistines have Goliath. Goliath is their champion at the front lines of their army. And Goliath, he's this huge warrior machine sort of a man. This Bible says he's almost 10 feet tall. He's wearing all this bronze armor. He's this huge, strong guy. It literally says for the spear that he uses, the tip of the spear is 15 pounds. This is a heavy spear. They didn't talk about the rest of the spear, but that's a heavy spear if the tip is 15 pounds. But we're going to pick up here in this story of David versus Goliath. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to start reading in verse 16. It says, for 40 days, the Philistine, and it's talking about Goliath came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain to these 10 loaves and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit, see how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines and facing each other. David left these things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking to them, Goliath, the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" This is funny. David literally just says, "So what happens to me when I kill this guy?" Like David's literally saying, this guy is disrespecting the name of the living God. I know God's on my side, and he's definitely not on this guy's side when I fight him. So, of course, I would win that fight. He is so confident. He doesn't seem scared one bit of Goliath. Goliath's probably twice his size, literally. But he is not scared of this guy. You know, after this, Saul summons David because Saul is here and he hears of David saying these things about Goliath. And he summons David to him. And he's like, "David, you don't want to get in this fight, bro. Do you see this guy?" And he tells him not to fight Goliath. But then David talks about how he's a shepherd, but he's killed lions and bears before protecting his flock. Like he does this. And he somehow convinces Saul to let him challenge Goliath. So let's pick it up back in verse 36. It says this: "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David slays Goliath with one shot from his sling. You know, in David, you see a man who displays a true fear of God. I don't think David talked about himself in this whole story once, bringing glory to himself. It was all about God, bringing glory to the name of God. And he was so sure that he would defeat Goliath. And I think it's because he truly feared the Lord. He understood the power of God is up here and man is here. Goliath may be here, God's still here. And David understood that. His respect for God and his understanding of the power of God would not allow him to sit idly by while somebody mocked the name of God. He saw someone who was insulting God and honestly just chose to be God's instrument of wrath against him. And then in Goliath, you see someone who's showing the biggest lack of the fear of God in this story. Goliath is insulting God. He's flaunting all of his strength and all of his power and putting terror in the hearts of these people. And for kind of a good reason with the people, like if it was just David versus Goliath and no God with David, David's not winning this fight. But Goliath did not care about the God of Israel. Like he's opposing God, the God who created the world and everything in it, the God who gives us life and breath and everything good in our lives. That's the God that he's opposing. The God who parted a sea to free his people and then used that same sea to engulf their oppressors. That's the God that Goliath is opposing. You would be foolish to think that any plan that opposes that God could ever work out, could ever succeed. And I wonder where in our lives we might be opposing this same God. Because I know one thing, when we choose to oppose that God, that plan will not succeed. There is no victory against God, not even an empty one. I want to ask you guys, where might you be even insulting God by the ways that you're living your lives? How might you be disrespecting the God that you serve in the way that you're living? I also want to ask you guys how you might be like David today. Where in your life might you be like him? How do you stand up for the name of God? In what ways do you fight to fear him in the face of adversity? What victories have you experienced when you've chosen to fear God? True victory is always on the side of the one who fears God. And man, David had an incredible victory here in this story. Incredible. He defeated Goliath. The war was over after this. The Philistines had nothing on the Israelite army after the death of Goliath. David did that through the fear of God. The impossible became possible for him because he feared God. And church, we can have victory like this in our lives too. We can defeat the Goliaths in our lives too. You can overcome the problems in your life that seem like a Goliath, like they're too big to defeat, when you choose to fear God. Maybe right now your marriage feels like a Goliath. Maybe it has too many problems to figure out. It feels impossible that there's any hope of working through all these problems that you have to work out in your marriage. You can have huge victories in your marriage when you choose to fear God. Maybe your Goliath is at school. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's at home raising your family. Maybe it's with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Maybe you're just trying to figure out how to have a relationship with God, and that feels like a Goliath, like I cannot figure this out. You can have victory over your Goliaths in your life when you choose to fear God. Amen. When you humble yourself before your God and you choose to respect him and honor him first before anyone or anything else. That is the first step to all of those victories in your lives. Now, I do need to say something about these victories because this is not every day in the life of the one who fears God. There's only one story in David's life of him defeating Goliath. Most people who choose to live this way of fearing God, most of them endure lots of pain and hardship and toil for years. It's funny, David, not too long after this story, he's on the run from Saul for years because Saul is super jealous of all this fame that David's getting, and now Saul has the power to go and try to kill David. So he's chasing him literally from town to town, trying to kill him for years. And David has to endure this. And David's probably thinking, what's happening right now? I just chose to fear God. I defeated Goliath. That was awesome. But now this king is trying to kill me? I fear you, God. Do something against this guy. And he probably prayed that prayer for years before anything was done. David was a king, and yet he was being chased around by an insecure lunatic for years. And this doesn't seem like a victory for David, even though he still fears God. And that's the thing we all have to be okay with if this is the life that we want, choosing to fear God. There will be times of suffering in our lives, endured suffering, lots of hardship. Man, like when you read the Hall of Faith in Hebrews, it's a list of all these faithful people, but they all suffered intensely, lots of different ways. But if God made it so that everyone who feared him prospered all the time, everyone would fear him. That'd be a no-brainer. Everyone's fearing God. That's the way to prosperity. But that's not the way it works, church. But in the end, Saul died as the rejected king who couldn't get over his fear of man being more important than his fear of God. And in the end, David will forever be known as the priestly king, a man after God's own heart, one of the ancestors of Jesus, because of the ways that he repeatedly feared God, even when hardship was what he got after fearing God. God honored David as he will always honor those who fear him. And we need to hold on to that truth, that even though there may be times of suffering, times of hardship, times of turmoil in our lives, times where it feels like we have no control, we have to understand that God will always honor those who fear him. In the end, true victory is always on the side of the one who fears God. And so as we close, I want to encourage all of us today to evaluate our own lives and where we need to fear God more. What is the empty victory that you might be wasting your time chasing right now without the fear of God? Where might you be showing an absolute lack of the fear of God? And then in what ways do you fight to fear him in the face of adversity? What victories can you call upon that you've experienced with God as you've chosen to fear him? And then how can you choose to fear God today and have victory over the Goliaths in your lives? I pray that we can all learn through this just to fear God more and to experience the victory that comes with that. Amen. That is our service for today. Thank you. You are all dismissed.